Welcome to Colonize the Ocean podcast, where we discuss oceanic colonization, exploration, and education with your hosts Adam Jewell and Brendan Traxler.
Okay, picture this. What if our next great city wasn't built on land? What if, instead of sprawling across concrete and steel like we always do, humanity decided to push its boundary somewhere completely different, somewhere uh, incredibly challenging? Today we are diving deep, really deep into a truly audacious vision, Project Deep. And this isn't just about like sticking one building underwater. No, this is about pioneering a permanent human settlement right under the sea. The scale of the challenge, the sheer ingenuity involved, it's almost, well, it's kind of mind-bending, really. For this deep dive, we've pulled together some really fascinating insights, especially from the amazing team over at the YouTube channel Mega Builds. Their video, Inside the UK's $300 Underwater City Project, it's just fantastic. A real goldmine of info on this whole thing.
Absolutely. And our mission for you today really is to unpack all of that, piece by piece. We're going to get into the incredible engineering, the stuff that's making this seem possible, but also the surprising human challenges, the things you might not think about when you imagine living in, well, one of Earth's most hostile places. And we'll link it all back to the history, too.
Right.
People have tried this before, right? So, yeah, the goal is to give you a real shortcut to understanding this futuristic frontier. So you walk away really knowing what it takes to build and live deep down there.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty then, Project Deep. The first thing that really grabs you is the location, at least where it's starting. We're not talking about some remote ocean trench, not yet anyway. This whole thing is kicking off in a pretty quiet corner of the UK, in Gloucestershire specifically, and the construction site. It's not what you'd expect. It's this massive 20-hectare flooded quarry.
Right, exactly. A huge water-filled pit, already 80 meters deep, which is, pretty deep, and it's naturally pressurized because of the water. But here's the kicker, the really visionary part you mentioned. Instead of thinking, okay, let's pump all this water out and build something, they looked at it and went,
Let's build in the water.
precisely. They saw the water itself as the construction environment. And that fundamental shift, using the water instead of fighting it, that's what makes this so incredibly ambitious. It's working with the environment, not just against it.
Yeah, it's a totally different way of thinking.
And it's not just us saying it's ambitious, it's genuinely being called the world's most ambitious underwater construction project right now. And to really get why, you have to think about the physics for a second. Their target depth, eventually, in the open ocean is 200 meters. That's, what, about 650 feet down?
That's deep, really deep.
It is. And at that depth, the water pressure, it multiplies the force on everything by 20 times compared to the surface. 20 times. Just try to imagine that. It's like having an elephant standing on every single square inch of your building.
Wow. Okay, so any normal building would just implode.
Instantly.
Yeah.
Crushed. Gone. So you can't just, beef up a normal design. It forces a complete rethink, a paradigm shift, really. Your materials corrode like crazy down there. Your usual construction methods, they just wouldn't work. They'd collapse under the force. It's not just difficult, it's fundamentally different.
And tackling something that different, that fundamentally challenging, it must cost an absolute fortune.
Oh, you better believe it. The financial backing is pretty staggering. Right now, there's a single anonymous investor who's already put in over $125 million.
Just one investor, $125 million.
Yep. Which is, a huge vote of confidence. Somebody really believes this impossible problem can be solved. And here's where it gets really wild. As they scale up, moving from the quarry towards the actual ocean deployment, that number is expected to blow past $300 million.
$300 million for an underwater habitat project. That's monumental.
It really is. It's a massive investment in pushing the absolute limits of what we thought was possible in the deep sea. It shows a deep belief that this can actually happen and that whatever they find down there, scientifically or otherwise, is worth it.
Okay, so we've got this immense challenge, building for humans, where humans really aren't meant to be. How on earth do you actually do it? How do you build something strong enough? The solution seems to involve, rethinking construction completely, right? From the seabed up, as they say.
Exactly. Forget pouring concrete or lowering huge pre-made chunks from a barge, at least not in the traditional way. They turned to something called robotic wire arc additive manufacturing. WHAM, for short.
Wham. Okay, what's that? Like 3D printing.
Basically, yeah. Think of it like industrial scale 3D printing, but with steel. You have these massive robotic arms, and they meticulously build up complex steel structures layer by layer with incredible precision. What makes it revolutionary for Project Deep is that they can build these huge complex shapes in situ, right there in the quarry, or eventually, maybe even deeper.
So they don't have to build it all on land and then figure out how to sink it perfectly.
Precisely. It cuts down massively on the logistics nightmare of moving enormous structures offshore. Plus, less waste, and you can design shapes that are perfectly optimized for that crushing pressure. Shapes that might be impossible to make any other way.
That's clever. Really clever.
And it's not just the method, it's the material, too. This isn't just any old steel. We're talking custom-engineered steel alloys. Things like high-strength, low-alloy steels, maybe even super tough miraging steels. They're designed specifically to handle not just the immense pressure, but also the constant gnawing corrosion from salt water over decades.
Right, because salt water eats through everything eventually.
It does. And get this for a sense of scale. Some of the habitat walls are over 20 centimeters thick.
20 centimeters, that's like 8 inches of solid steel.
Yep. 8 inches of custom steel holding back the entire ocean. Each habitat, each sentinel, as they call them, has to be basically indestructible from the outside while keeping everything perfectly sealed and the life support running flawlessly on the inside. No room for error. They even have to worry about things like hydrogen embrittlement in the steel from the salt water. It's complex stuff.
Non-negotiable is the word that comes to mind, which brings us to safety and oversight, I guess. You can't mess around with this.
Absolutely not. And they aren't. Every single step, every weld, every component, every viewpoint even, is meticulously checked and certified by Det Norske Veritas.
DNV.
DNV, I've heard of them. They're the ones who certify oil rigs and stuff, right? Dig ships. Exactly. They are the gold standard for safety in really extreme marine environments. Offshore oil platforms, deep-sea subs, complex energy systems, DNV certifies them. So having them oversee Project Deep, that's not just a nice-to-have, it's absolutely fundamental. They scrutinize everything, blueprints, materials, the actual building process, everything.
And that level of scrutiny, it probably feels even more critical after what happened with the Titan submersible, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. That tragedy in 2023 sent shockwaves through the whole deep-sea community. It was a stark reminder of what can happen when you cut corners, especially with certification and independent oversight. And Project Deep's response was immediate and very clear. They basically doubled down. No shortcuts, no compromises. Everything gets certified to offshore class standards by bodies like DNV before it goes anywhere near the water.
So it wasn't just a choice, it was a lesson learned. The hard way, unfortunately.
Learned the hard way, exactly. It really highlights how these major failures, as tragic as they are, can force a fundamental shift in safety culture and engineering philosophy, especially when you're operating right at the edge of what's possible. You just can't afford any mistakes down there.
Okay, so we've got these incredibly engineered, super safe steel domes. But what's it actually like inside? What's the living situation?
Right, let's talk about the Sentinel habitat itself. Think of it as a self-contained underwater home, really, designed for a small crew. Inside, you've got 6 private sleeping quarters, which is pretty important, giving everyone their own space when you're living that close together for potentially long periods.
Yeah, personal space would be key.
Definitely. Then there's a shared kitchen, a common living area, for eating together, relaxing, mission briefings, fosters that team spirit, and yes, a full bathroom, running water, the works. It uses a very efficient closed-loop waste system. So it's designed to be pretty self-sufficient and, surprisingly, quite comfortable. All the basics covered, even hundreds of feet down.
It sounds almost cozy in a high-tech underwater kind of way.
It does, yeah. And central to it all is the control and observation room. That's the nerve center, monitoring all the habitat systems. But it also has these amazing panoramic portals.
Yeah.
Big, thick, reinforced windows looking out into the deep.
Oh, wow. Imagine the view. Just watching the deep-sea life drift past.
Exactly. Bioluminescent creatures, strange fish. It must be incredible, a direct window into an alien world. But maybe the most ingenious bit of practical design is something called the moon pool.
A moon pool. What's that?
It's basically an opening in the floor of the habitat, open to the water below, but the air pressure inside keeps the water from flooding in. It lets divers swim directly in and out of the habitat without ever having to go through an airlock or depressurize the whole living space.
Ah, clever. So they can just drop down into the water whenever they need to do work outside.
Precisely. It makes going outside for research, maintenance, whatever, much quicker, much safer, and uses way less energy than constantly cycling an airlock.
Hmm.
It's a brilliant piece of practical design for actually working underwater, not just sitting inside.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But keeping people alive inside, that relies on the life support, right? The invisible
Well,
stuff.
absolutely critical. And it's way beyond just pumping in air. We're talking sophisticated systems, constantly managing the exact levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide, controlling humidity, keeping the temperature stable, creating a perfectly balanced little atmosphere inside, like a mini biosphere. And redundancy is everything because, like we said, there's no quick fix down there.
Right. If something breaks, you can't just pop outside for parts.
Exactly. So there are backup systems for literally everything. Multiple layers. Emergency lighting, dedicated oxygen tanks that can last for days, big freshwater reserves with purification systems. If one system fails, another has to kick in instantly and seamlessly. There has to be backup for the backup, practically. Safety and survival depend entirely on it.
Empowering all this, keeping the lights on, the life support running. How does that work deep underwater?
Well, right now the plan relies on heavy-duty surface-linked cables, basically a very long, very strong extension cord connecting them to the power grid on land or a support vessel. These cables themselves are pretty impressive bits of engineering, armored, pressure-resistant, you name it. But the future vision is even cooler. They're looking seriously at integrating marine renewable energy.
Oh, like underwater windmills?
Sort of. Underwater turbines using ocean currents, yeah. That, coupled with advanced battery banks to store the power. The long-term goal is to make these habitats much more self-sufficient. If they can generate their own power down there, it drastically cuts down on the need for surface support,
Yeah.
reduces the environmental footprint, makes them truly independent underwater outposts. That's a huge step towards long-term sustainability.
And what's really fascinating here is that this isn't just about building one-off labs. You mentioned the modular design.
Yes, that's a key part of the vision. The Sentinels are designed with standardized docking ports. Think of it like underwater Lego. Individual habitats can connect together, forming larger complexes, multi-unit campuses. They talk about creating entire underwater research villages.
Wow, villages underwater.
Exactly. Places where teams from different countries, different scientific fields could all live and work together side by side on the seafloor. So it's not just a structure, it's a prototype for a permanent collaborative human presence down there, a real community built for long-term deep-sea science.
Okay, building the structure is one thing, an incredible thing. But putting people inside it for weeks or months, that's a whole other ballgame, isn't it? Can't people actually handle living like that?
That is the million-dollar question, or maybe the $300 million question here. And it turns out, figuring out the engineering, the physics, as insanely hard as that was, it might have been the easier part. The really tricky bit became, can humans psychologically, emotionally, even physically cope with living long-term in the thing you've built?
So how do they test that? You can't just stick people down there and hope for the best.
No, definitely not. That's why they built a full-size Sentinel mock-up first, on dry land, at their base in Gloucestershire. And they started running these intensive 28-day simulations. Crews lived inside the mock-up exactly as they would underwater, while the team monitored absolutely everything: physical health, mental state, team dynamics, everything. Trying to figure out what really happens when you seal people up like that.
And what did they find? Were there surprises?
Oh yeah, quite a few. Especially on the physical side, things you might not expect, like food. Turns out, in pressurized environments like that, food starts to taste, bland.
Bland. Why? Does the pressure mess with your taste buds?
Not directly the taste buds, no. It's more about subtle fluid shifts in your body, and crucially, your sense of smell gets reduced. And smell is like 80% of taste, right? So the culinary lead, a guy named Joe Costa, had to basically reinvent the menu. He started developing really intensely flavored dishes, spicy curries, rich sauces, strong desserts like sticky toffee pudding.
Things with a real kick.
Exactly, and they tested them all in hyperbaric chambers to make sure the flavors would still come through properly at depth. Plus, people burn way more calories down there than you'd think. The cold, the pressure, the slightly denser air. It all adds up. People were losing weight without even noticing.
So you need flavor and calories.
Absolutely. Every meal has to be engineered not just for nutrition, but for taste satisfaction and a serious energy delivery, fueling body and mind because morale is crucial too.
Okay, that's fascinating about the food.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the psychological side being the toughest hurdle.
Yeah, that's where it got really interesting and really challenging. Those early simulations showed that stress builds up incredibly fast in that kind of confinement. You saw increased irritability, people feeling really isolated, sometimes friction between team members.
I can imagine. No sunlight, no way to just step outside for 5 minutes.
Exactly. No natural cues, no easy escape. You're stuck there. And that constant pressure, both literal and metaphorical, really wears on you. Psychological resilience isn't just nice to have, it's absolutely essential. It became the biggest focus.
So how do you prepare people for that?
Well, they started training crews almost like astronauts because the parallels are uncanny, right?
Yeah, isolation, life support, high stakes. It's very similar to space travel.
Totally. So the training now is incredibly rigorous. It takes 12 to 18 months. They do endless mission simulations, practicing every possible emergency until it's muscle memory. They track sleep patterns meticulously to manage fatigue. And maybe most importantly, they do intensive team cohesion exercises, understanding how people react under pressure, building trust, making sure the team functions perfectly even when things get tough.
Because down there, you have to rely on each other completely.
100%. And remember, decompression takes days. If something goes seriously wrong, you can't just surface quickly. Once you're down, you are committed. You're down until the planned rotation, barring a major emergency requiring a slow ascent. Your life depends on the habitat, the systems, and the people you're down there with. Mental toughness and teamwork are non-negotiable.
It sounds incredibly intense. But this whole idea, living underwater, it feels so futuristic. But you mentioned earlier, it's not entirely new, is it?
Not at all. And that's a really important context for Project Deep. We actually had a kind of golden age of this stuff back in the mid-20th century. The legendary Jacques Cousteau, everyone knows him, he launched the Conshelf program back in the 60s.
Conshelf. I think I've heard of that.
Yeah, it was a series of experiments basically designed to prove people could live and work underwater for real lengths of time. Conshelf 1 was the big breakthrough in 1962. They put two aquanauts, 10 meters down off Marseille, and they lived there for a whole week.
A week underwater back in 1962. That's amazing.
It really was. It proved the basic concept worked. It was possible.
So Cousteau kicked it off.
He did. And then the U.S. Navy jumped in big time with the Sea Lab program. They really pushed the envelope, deeper dives, longer missions, tougher conditions, testing the limits. And that whole period, say mid-60s to late 70s, was buzzing. By the 1970s, there had been something like over 60 underwater habitats built around the world.
60? Wow. Like what?
Well, you had projects like Hydrolab, TechTite, Marine Lab, all contributing knowledge. Even NASA got involved. They realized that living underwater was a pretty good analog for spaceflight. Same challenges. Isolation, pressure, reliance on life support, zero room for error. So they used undersea missions to help train astronauts and study crew dynamics.
That makes so much sense, using one extreme environment to prepare for another.
Exactly. It was this really exciting period of exploration both downwards and upwards.
So, if there were 60 habitats, and it was such a golden age, what happened? Why didn't it continue? Why aren't we all living in underwater suburbs now?
Yeah, it's a good question. Basically, by the 1980s, the funding started to dry up big time. A lot of the focus and the money, and frankly a public imagination, shifted towards space. The space shuttle era was beginning. Mars seemed exciting. The deep ocean maybe felt a bit less glamorous.
So space stole the spotlight.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Budgets got cut, momentum was lost. Most of those pioneering habitats were eventually dismantled or just abandoned on the seabed, sadly.
Yeah.
Today, incredibly, only one from that whole era is still operational. That's the Aquarius Reef Base down in the Florida Keys.
Aquarius, I know that one. It's still running.
Still running, still doing science, still used for training astronauts, still trained there sometimes, believe it or not. It's a living link to that past era. So what Project Deep represents now, it's not just building another habitat. It's the boldest revival of that whole dream. It's taking the lessons from Conshelf and Sea Lab and Aquarius, but aiming for something much bigger.
Yeah.
Scalable, permanent infrastructure, moving beyond just experiments to actual sustainable presence.
A true comeback story for underwater living.
In a way, yes. And it's important to say, while Project Deep is maybe the furthest along, they're not totally alone in this revival. You've got Fabien Cousteau, Jacques' grandson, building his own project called Proteus in the Caribbean, aims to be a really advanced research station. And there are other teams, other companies developing concepts for modular stations elsewhere, Mediterranean, Red Sea. There's definitely a renewed global interest.
So the race is back on, in a sense.
You could say that, but right now, based on everything we're seeing, Project Deep seems to be leading the pack. They're physically building things, testing things, hitting milestones. They genuinely seem closer to putting a long-term habitat in the water than anyone else. They're really at the forefront of this new wave.
And they have clear next steps, right? You mentioned the Vanguard habitats.
Exactly. So the crew is constantly running simulations in the full-size mock-up on land right now. That's ongoing. The next big wet step is the Vanguard habitats. These are smaller three-person units. They're scheduled for underwater trials in the Gloucestershire quarry starting in 2025.
2025, that's basically next year.
It's coming up fast. And then the main event. The first full-scale Sentinel habitat is planned to launch in 2027. It'll start in the quarry, get everything dialed in, and then make the big move out into the open ocean. And they'll use custom-built submersibles for crew changes, supplies, all the logistics to keep it running.
It's really happening then. It's not just drawings and plans anymore.
No, it's concrete. Well, steel being built and tested. Which brings us to the ultimate goal. Where are they going with this? The target destination is often called the Twilight Zone.
The Twilight Zone sounds mysterious.
It is. Scientifically, it's the mesopelagic zone, roughly 200 down to 1,000 meters, deep enough that only a tiny bit of sunlight filters down. It's dim, ethereal, but here's the crucial part. Scientists think this zone holds more marine life, more sheer biomass, than all other parts of the ocean combined.
More than everywhere else put together, seriously.
That's the estimate. A staggering amount of life, biodiversity, ecosystems.
Yeah.
That we know almost nothing about because it's so hard to get to and stay there. So putting permanent habitats like the Sentinels in the Twilight Zone, it's not just about survival, it's about unlocking a whole universe of science, understanding life down there, ocean currents, climate connections. It could genuinely open the door to a completely new human frontier.
A frontier right here on our own planet.
Exactly, which does make you think, if we can crack this, if we can learn to live and work sustainably in the deep ocean, what does that say about our potential? What other impossible places on Earth could we adapt to? What else is out there waiting to be discovered right under our noses or, well, under our boats?
What an incredible journey we've covered today.
Yeah.
Seriously, from that initial wild idea of building in a flooded quarry in the UK to the amazing robotic tech, the WAM printing, building these steel domes layer by layer, the huge investment backing it all, and the absolute necessity of safety, learning from things like the Titan tragedy, using DNV certification.
Right, and then actually picturing life inside, the sentinels, the private quarters, the shared spaces, that awesome moon pool for diving, and the human element being maybe the toughest part, the bland food needing flavor boosts, the sheer psychological resilience required, training like astronauts.
Yeah, and remembering, this isn't totally out of the blue. We looked back at Cousteau's comm shelf, the Navy's Sea Lab, that whole lost golden age, and now Project Deep, bringing it back, but bigger, more permanent, aiming for those underwater villages.
Leading the charge, with milestones like Vanguard coming up super soon in 2025, and the first Sentinel deployment plan for 2027, heading for that mysterious, life-rich Twilight Zone.
It really does feel like we're on the cusp of something potentially transformative in ocean exploration.
It does, and it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? All this effort, all this money, all this brain power going into Project Deep, what does it tell us about that fundamental human drive to explore, to push boundaries? If we manage this, if we establish a permanent foothold in the deep ocean, one of the most challenging places imaginable, what other extreme environments on Earth suddenly seem, maybe not easy, but possible? Where else could we go? And what discoveries or even challenges are waiting for us in those places?
That's a huge thought to end on. Absolutely fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
So what stands out to you listening to all this? Does the idea of living underwater grab you? Would you sign up for a stint in a Sentinel? Definitely something to ponder.